All right, we've got some breaking news from the United Kingdom and the royal family.
The footage has to be shown in the last 10 minutes of the ceremony. This is the only window we have. There can be no mistakes. The words came from Sarah Ferguson, Prince Andrew's former wife, her voice slicing through the cold air behind the grand hall of Buckingham Palace with the urgency of an ultimatum. Once discarded by the royal family, she had returned not to seek absolution, but to bring everything to an end. Beneath the refinement of her evening gown burned a soul driven by revenge, and clasped in her hand was a small USB device, an unassuming object carrying the potential to shatter the honor of an entire dynasty. Surrounded by nobles and foreign dignitaries, Prince Edward observed without a word. He was never the boisterous fighter, but rather the silent sentinel, his sharp gaze cutting through the sparkle of ceremony to detect the danger gathering in the darkness. The moment Sarah carried out her secret handoff with the man Prince William had previously stripped of his titles, Edward understood he had just seen the first decisive move in a scheme aimed directly at staining the crown. There would be no explosions, no chaos of fire or gunshots, only a single video, yet one capable of striking at the very foundation of the throne. Caught between loyalty and treachery, between what once was and what now loomed ahead, a conflict had begun. And within this quiet chess match, the question remained: could Prince Edward protect the monarchy, or was he destined only to postpone its unavoidable downfall? Within the walls of Buckingham Palace, the Royal Legacy exhibition unfolded in an atmosphere of absolute gravity. Crystal chandeliers poured light from the ceiling, transforming the marble floors into a rippling mirror that cast reflections across the faces of hundreds of nobles and distinguished guests. This was not merely a historical showcase, it was a deliberate display of authority and cohesion, a ceremonial assertion of monarchical strength with every member of the royal family present in full view. The military orchestra swelled with a triumphant anthem, its commanding notes wrapping the grand hall in an aura of splendor and control. At the crossroads of heritage and power stood Prince Edward, Duke of Edinburgh. He remained unobtrusive near the edge of the exhibition space, a faithful and restrained observer of the crown. Edward had never sought attention or spectacle. He was known instead as the quiet executor, the man who consistently placed the monarchy's dignity above personal feeling. His keen eyes, honed by years of navigating discreet crises, scanned the crowd with practiced precision. Then his focus fixed on a lone figure near the far end of the hall, beside the display of ancient crowns. It was Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York, the former wife of Prince Andrew. A trace of her former confidence lingered, but it was dulled by the sorrow of someone long erased. Years earlier, the late Queen Elizabeth had formally cut Sarah off from the royal family after a succession of personal scandals, stripping her of all duties and forcing her departure in public disgrace. Since that rupture, her rare appearances had always felt like an open wound, proof of fractures that time had failed to heal. Edward's brow tightened. Sarah Ferguson's presence at an event of such importance, without any official standing, stirred a quiet sense of unease. She wasn't engaging with the displays or exchanging courtesies. She hovered like an apparition, observing everything with a cold, deliberate intensity that felt out of place. Moving carefully, Edward slipped past a cluster of diplomatic aides and positioned himself behind the tall glass partition, separating the main hall from the staff area. The chandelier's light still filtered through, but the music and voices were muted. From there, he watched Sarah lift her phone to her ear. Reflected light sharpened her features as her expression hardened with urgency. She spoke softly, yet the tension in her voice carried through the thin barrier. Everything will happen in the final 10 minutes of the ceremony. Yes, the video must play at that exact moment. Her fingers tightened around the fabric of her gown, an unconscious sign of inner turmoil. This is our only opportunity. There can be no errors. her mouth pressed into a narrow line, and for a fleeting second, Edward saw the fury she had carried through years of exile, a deeply personal resentment toward the institution that had expelled her. Every instinct Edward possessed, those that had quietly safeguarded the monarchy through countless unseen threats, flared into warning. This was no harmless appearance. It was preparation for an attack. He withdrew seamlessly into the crowd, unseen once again. For the next 15 minutes, he tracked Sarah from a careful distance. The pursuit reached its turning point when she slipped into a dim side corridor reserved for palace staff. She was not alone. Waiting there was Sir Lionel Ashcroft, once a senior financial advisor to the royal household. Lionel nursed his own bitterness. 2 years earlier, Prince William had exposed his questionable dealings, leading to his disgrace, demotion, and complete loss of influence within the palace. Mutual resentment had forged an alliance between the two exiles. Their encounter lasted only moments. They exchanged no words, only looks, before Lionel discreetly handed Sarah a small object, an envelope or perhaps a data device. There was no lingering, no unnecessary contact. They separated immediately, strangers once more. Sarah returned to the main hall, while Lionel disappeared into the service corridors. The secrecy of the exchange, the fire in Sarah's gaze, and the involvement of a shared adversary pushed Edward past mere observation. Sarah's return, aligned with Lionel, a man intimately familiar with the palace's inner mechanisms and personally disgraced by William, pointed unmistakably toward one conclusion: a calculated attempt to smear the crown. Later that night, after the exhibition concluded, Edward withdrew to his private library. The expansive room lay washed in pale moonlight, heavy with the scent of old oak and aging paper. He stood before a stern portrait of King Charles, the monarch etched with the burden of rule. Edward closed his fist around the weight of his ducal ring. There were no witnesses, no listening ears, only shadows. What he had seen and heard was no accident. Sarah was no longer the inconsequential Fergie of the past. His voice fell to a whisper, nearly swallowed by the silence. If she has truly returned, it isn't to welcome anyone. A battle for the honor of the royal family had begun, and Edward, the quiet sentinel, now stood alone as a player on this dangerous chessboard. 4 days before the grand exhibition at Buckingham Palace, an entirely different mood settled over a shabby, time-worn tea room hidden in Chelsea. Its dim bulbs and the stale odor of threadbare carpets formed a harsh counterpoint to royal splendor. At a secluded corner table sat Sarah Ferguson and Sir Lionel Ashcroft, close in distance, yet separated by eyes sharpened with calculation and cold intent. Sarah, the cast-off Duchess, still nursed a resentment as raw as an open wound. Years had passed since the late Queen Elizabeth had cut her off completely from the royal family, stripping her of duties and driving her into humiliating retreat, but the bitterness had never softened. Instead, it had fermented into something toxic, feeding an unyielding hunger for revenge. As she studied Lionel, her face no longer carried the impulsive charm of a former royal consort. It bore the rigid focus of a conspirator. Sir Lionel Ashcroft, wrapped in a faded Savile Row suit that barely preserved the illusion of dignity, carried a colder, more methodical hatred. Once a trusted advisor, his downfall came the moment Prince William personally exposed his covert financial schemes and dubious dealings, collapsing his career overnight. Deprived of status, respect, and identity, the throne no longer represented loyalty. It had become the force that had robbed him of everything. Two figures erased from favor, bound by the same desire to reclaim lost honor, sealed their alliance in deliberate silence. Their plan took shape with ruthless precision, like a quiet engine built for destruction. There would be no violence, only manipulation of media and the erosion of public faith. First came the video. Using his technical skill, Lionel had assembled it with brutal ingenuity. It wasn't entirely fake, but mercilessly edited. Select lines from separate speeches by King Charles and Prince William were cut and stitched together with surgical care, manufacturing the illusion of a heated confrontation and suggesting deep fractures between father and son. The aim was clear: undermine confidence in a seamless succession and plant the idea of generational rupture within the House of Windsor. Next was what they called the Heritage Incident. Drawing on her intimate understanding of palace routines, Sarah proposed a seemingly minor disruption with enormous consequences. During the exhibition's tea reception, a carefully bribed attendant would accidentally spill red wine onto one of the most invaluable historical documents on display. The scarlet stain on centuries-old parchment would be more than damage. It would become a visual metaphor for corruption and disorder within the royal family, an image destined to race across tabloids and television screens. The third phase focused on psychological impact. Lionel assumed control of the lighting and sound systems. By subtly draining warmth from the stage lights and interfering with microphone frequencies, he would make King Charles appear weakened and drained during his address, his delivery uneven, his authority diminished. This manufactured frailty would quickly harden into media narrative. The monarchy was faltering, decline already visible. Together, the scheme amounted to a calculated strike against the institution's reputation itself, persuading press and public alike that royal unity had collapsed and that the dynasty was entering its twilight. It was vengeance at its highest form, not targeting individuals, but destabilizing the entire structure. As their covert meeting ended, Lionel slid a small black metal USB drive across the table to Sarah. "This is the backup," he said hoarsely. "The original altered video, never uploaded. If anything fails, this protects us both. As long as you have it, it can't be traced back." Sarah accepted the device with deliberate care. A surge of confidence rushed through her, tangible insurance for the greatest risk she had ever taken. What she didn't know was that beneath Lionel's reassurance lay a concealed security layer, allowing him to trace the drive if necessary. He had always planned ahead, prepared to abandon an ally the moment his own position was threatened. That night, alone in her rented flat, Sarah sat under the weak glow of a desk lamp. She rolled the tiny USB between her fingers. Images of King Charles and William flickered through her thoughts, intertwined with memories of the contempt she had endured. A cold smile crept across her face, stripped of warmth. This time, the honor will be mine, not theirs. To her, the USB was the key, the weapon, and the promise of final victory. In the days that followed the night of the exhibition, Buckingham Palace projected an image of flawless calm. Yet beneath that polished exterior, a silent conflict was already underway. Prince Edward carried a heavy dual responsibility. He needed to move quickly to protect the royal family's honor while maintaining absolute secrecy. He understood the monarchy's vulnerability all too well. Rumors alone, even unfounded ones, could trigger internal turmoil and provide endless fuel for a scandal-driven press. Telling King Charles or Prince William was out of the question. Their concern, once visible, could be turned into a weapon. Edward chose to operate alone, placing his trust in a single confidant, Lady Amelia Pembroke. As chief of protocol, Amelia was known for her rigid discipline and unassailable integrity. Though often regarded as traditional to a fault, she remained untouched by factional politics or personal vendettas. Edward approached her under the harmless pretense of reviewing ceremonial procedures to improve future events, an official request she could neither question nor decline. Beneath this legitimate cooperation, Edward and Amelia constructed an impenetrable line of defense. Their first target was the core of the plot, the video. As the authority overseeing all presentation materials, Emilia introduced an advanced digital signature system for every video and document scheduled for public display. Any unauthorized alteration, no matter how subtle, would immediately invalidate the signature, leaving undeniable evidence of interference. Using his years of quiet experience, Edward then identified weaknesses in palace security. Under the justification of strengthening protection for the royal legacy, they discreetly installed microscopic hidden cameras inside the technical control room. These devices were not meant to deter theft, but to observe the very individuals responsible for managing video and audio playback. To counter Sarah's planned heritage incident, Edward took another covert step. He ordered the substitution of the most fragile and irreplaceable historical artifacts with expertly crafted replicas. The genuine items were locked away in a high-security vault. Should red wine be spilled, it would result in nothing more than an embarrassing accident, not a devastating act of cultural desecration. Despite the precision of their preparations, Edward felt the pressure tightening. Sarah, guided by the instincts of a former insider, began to sense something was wrong. There were too many inspections, too many unfamiliar staff members. Alarmed by the possibility of discovery, she urged Lionel to accelerate their plan. That impatience proved to be the enemy's fatal error. Unwilling to risk further delays, Lionel resorted to bribing a low-ranking technician with cash. His instructions were simple: access the projection server and replace the officially authenticated video with the forged one. Edward and Emilia had anticipated this move. The technician Lionel targeted had already been under surveillance. When he accepted the USB from Lionel in a dimly lit parking area, containing the falsified video, manipulated clips, and detailed instructions for sabotaging lighting systems, he was unaware that he had already been exposed. The operation unfolded without a sound. The instant the handoff was completed, Edward received confirmation. The technician, believing himself to be Sarah's inside operative, was in fact Emilia's planted asset. He would deliver the final, decisive proof. On the eve of the ceremony, Edward reviewed the footage from the hidden cameras. The images were unmistakable. Lionel Ashcroft, his face drawn tight with tension, passing the small black USB into the technician's hand. Every furtive gesture, every flash of greed in his eyes was preserved beyond denial. Edward powered down the screen and released a slow breath, the strain finally easing. The evidence was secure. He closed his fist, the chill of his ducal ring pressing against his skin. The moment to strike back had arrived, and it would come as a single, ruthless blow, delivered with absolute precision. In the strained hours before the exhibition's formal opening, Sir Lionel Ashcroft began to feel the ground shift beneath him. With a trained eye for systems, he detected abnormal data requests probing the event's video storage network. Suspicion hardened into a quiet, creeping panic. Lionel understood that anyone capable of such access had to possess serious authority inside the palace. He chose aggression over caution. In the depth of night, using an untraceable computer, Lionel sent an unsigned email to Theo. The engineer Prince Edward had entrusted with managing digital signatures and data security. Cloaked in dry technical language, sharpened with threat, the message accused Theo of unauthorized system intrusion for the purpose of stealing proprietary event materials. The strike wasn't meant for Edward directly. It was aimed at Lady Emilia Pembroke. Theo was her appointee, and branding him a criminal would instantly shatter Emilia's credibility and standing. If she fell, Edward would be stripped of his sole principled, legitimate ally within the palace. It was a vicious, underhanded tactic designed to isolate Edward and cripple any official counteraction. Edward learned of the attack within minutes of the email's release. He felt the pressure tightening. Lionel was taking a reckless gamble, manufacturing a smaller crisis to conceal the larger conspiracy. Edward couldn't allow Emilia to be compromised. Protecting her integrity meant protecting the monarchy itself. He moved immediately. Edward convened an emergency meeting with Amelia and a select group of trusted technicians, deliberately excluding anyone Lionel might have corrupted. He made no mention of Sarah or the broader plot, framing the discussion strictly around preserving the integrity of ceremonial data. He laid down a clear directive. Every official video and document used in this ceremony must carry this digital signature. A complex sequence of code appeared on the screen. Any file without this identifier will be classified as fraudulent and rejected. With that single measure, Lionel's forged video was rendered useless. At the same time, the anonymous accusation was recast as a panicked defensive move by the true saboteur. Still, Edward needed definitive proof to end the conflict. He tasked Theo, the very engineer under attack, with discreetly tracing the source of the anonymous email. Driven by anger and determination, Theo worked without pause. Using his deep technical knowledge, he followed the trail backward through the servers Lionel had accessed. Despite his sophistication, Lionel had fallen victim to arrogance. Confident in his layered cover, he failed to eliminate the final trace. At last, Theo sent Edward a brief confirmation, just a line of code. The email had been traced not to a random public network, but to a specific machine. The location matched the personal computer in Sir Lionel Ashcroft's private office inside his rented Kensington flat. In attempting to shield himself, Lionel had constructed his own undoing. His effort to weaken the opposition through false accusations had left an unmistakable digital mark, tying him directly to sabotage and hostile actions against palace staff. Edward stared at the code glowing coldly on his phone. What he felt wasn't triumph, but a heavy sense of regret. Those cast out by the crown often sought distance or peace, yet Sarah and Lionel had chosen ruin. He spoke softly, his words fading into the stillness. The hunter has caught himself. The board had turned. Edward now possessed not only evidence of the video conspiracy, but proof of the attack itself, irrefutably linking Sir Lionel Ashcroft to the scheme. The Royal Legacy exhibition had reached its closing moments, rising to a peak of solemn grandeur. King Charles had just finished his address, greeted by sustained applause that filled the hall. Warmth and pride washed through Buckingham Palace's grand chamber. At that precise moment, Sarah Ferguson stood unnaturally still, her expression cold and fixed on the technical control room, where Lionel Ashcroft remained hidden in the shadows, preparing what he believed would be their decisive strike. By their design, this was the instant when their technician, the man Sarah trusted as her inside contact, would replace the official video with the maliciously edited version. Standing discreetly behind the king, Prince Edward sensed Sarah's uneven breathing. He also felt the sharp electric tension emanating from Lionel, who was convinced his plan was unfolding without interference. The routine signal check video began to play, a mandatory step before the ceremony's conclusion. Sarah's mouth curved into a smile of victory. It lasted only a heartbeat, then froze. Instead of the fabricated footage suggesting a bitter rift between father and son, the enormous screen displayed a technical interface, a clear editing timeline exposing illegal manipulation and replacement of the original file. Moments later, hidden camera footage appeared. There was Sir Lionel Ashcroft, his face pale with fear, discreetly passing a small black USB to the technician in a secluded parking area. Shock seized the hall. Murmurs rippled outward before collapsing into a suffocating silence. Lionel attempted to flee, but every exit was already sealed by guards. Sarah staggered, color draining from her face. She was being unmasked, just not in the way she had planned. Prince Edward stepped out from the assembled ranks and moved calmly to the center of the stage. His composed authority drew every gaze. He did not need to raise his voice. The evidence spoke louder than any declaration. Edward methodically presented the undeniable trail. First came the financial records. Over the previous 3 weeks, Substantial sums had been transferred from a shell company quietly controlled by Sarah into accounts belonging to Lionel Ashcroft and the bribed technician, unmistakable proof of coordinated collusion. Then he revealed emails Sarah herself had sent regarding seating arrangements and event schedules. Embedded within them were unique digital signatures that matched the same covert account used to breach the system and disable security protocols. Sarah exploded, her voice shaking with fury and desperation. "It's all fake! I've been set up!" she cried. "I have proof! The backup USB!" In a frantic motion, she tore the black drive from her clutch, certain it was her safeguard, the final weapon to clear her name. That moment marked the ultimate betrayal. Edward accepted the USB calmly. He connected it to the projector and played the original, unaltered video Lionel had secretly prepared for her. Lionel's face filled the screen. He was shown speaking with another man, his own accomplice, discussing the scheme. "I gave her the backup," Lionel sneered, his expression thick with calculation. "It looks harmless, but if everything falls apart and they're caught, we'll blame Edward for hacking the system to frame Sarah." Sarah stood frozen. The blood seemed to drain from her body. In that instant, she understood the truth. The USB she believed was her lifeline, her protection, was the very snare Lionel had placed in her hands. He had always intended to sacrifice her to save himself. Her long-nurtured hatred for the royals collapsed into raw terror as she realized she had been betrayed by the one person she trusted. She turned toward Lionel, her eyes stripped of anger, filled instead with pure horror, the total annihilation of trust. The hall fell into a deathly quiet, broken only by the strained breathing of those watching. Edward exchanged a brief look with Prince William, a silent confirmation that the truth was now irreversible. Then he faced the assembly again and spoke slowly, his words resonating through the stillness. "The truth needs no defense." As the stage lights faded, the Royal Legacy exhibition was dismantled with efficiency, yet the revelation it had unleashed lingered like a specter throughout the hall. King Charles, his features marked by fatigue and deep disappointment, immediately called for a closed-door meeting in the smaller drawing room. Attendance was strictly limited. King Charles, Prince William, and Prince Edward. Sarah Ferguson and Sir Lionel Ashcroft were held under secure supervision, awaiting their fate. The meeting unfolded in a heavy, unbroken silence. Edward presented the complete body of evidence, the concealed camera recordings capturing the USB handover, the financial trails binding Sarah and Lionel together, and Lionel's own incriminating attempt to falsely accuse Theo and undermine Lady Amelia. His delivery was steady and restrained, devoid of drama, as though he were briefing routine security matters rather than exposing a grave betrayal. The judgment was delivered swiftly, without hesitation or leniency. For Sarah Ferguson, this act marked the final rupture, a total rejection of every pardon, tolerance, and second chance the royal family had ever offered. Speaking on behalf of the crown, King Charles decreed her permanent expulsion from all royal affairs. She was banished from the country and permanently barred from setting foot on any crown property. It was the most complete and public severing possible. Sir Lionel Ashcroft, the architect and willing partner in the scheme, suffered an even more severe reckoning. Every title and position he had once possessed was stripped from him immediately. His records were transferred to the Royal Financial Investigation Agency to uncover the hidden operations he had concealed for years. All access to the palace was revoked, and he was expelled from the elite circles he had fought ruthlessly to preserve. Justice had been carried out. What followed was acknowledgement. Lady Amelia Pembroke, whose unwavering integrity and quiet assistance had been crucial, received formal recognition from King Charles for her exceptional loyalty and diligence. Theo, the engineer who had courageously traced the anonymous email, was promoted on the spot to head of digital security for the palace, a role of critical importance in a modern monarchy. Above all stood Prince Edward. Every fact pointed to him as the silent force who had prevented a devastating public scandal. Yet when King Charles turned to commend him officially, Edward gently declined with a small shake of his head. He sought no accolades. As the meeting concluded, Edward made one final request: total discretion. No detailed disclosure to the press. The only public acknowledgement would be a brief statement noting that certain former associates had been dismissed due to ethical breaches. It was a principle Edward had long accepted. True honor did not reside in crowns or applause, but in unseen actions that preserved them. The monarchy had been protected, and its quiet guardian had completed his task. After finishing the story, in your opinion, is Sarah Ferguson more pitiable or more blameworthy when she ultimately gets betrayed by her own ally? And if you were Edward, what different verdict would you give her? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.